KIRO Radio.
You know what Sunday is? Sunday's Mother's Day. And it's a day to think about all the roles that your mom has played in your life. Friend, teacher, protector, and of course, caregiver. And eventually that caregiving role is reversed. It's inevitable. But for some, that time comes sooner rather than later. Colleen O'Brien has this special Mother's Day report.
Hi, Mommy.
There's just something about Mom.
How are you?
She won't let you get away with anything, and yet she's your best friend. That's certainly true for Cassie Moore, all of 18 years old, barreling full steam ahead into adulthood, eager to fly from the nest.
I want to either be in the CIA or State Department.
Cassie, in this mother's opinion, is the kind of child you wish for. And her mom, Lori Moore, knows she's lucky.
We had our dance competition. She was doing some booty popping.
The mother-daughter bond is strong with these two. It's why Cassie knew something was wrong. The first time it happened, she was in 8th grade. Her mom was supposed to pick her up from school. She forgot.
She would get frustrated, but she was always really good at hiding it because she's so smart. That's why we think she was able to hide the disease for so long, because she would just play it off, and she could play it off as being really busy at work, so I would just write it off as that.
And really, who hasn't that happened to? But then it happened again and again. Nothing gets past Cassie. She is whip smart, so she didn't buy her mom's excuses and turned to the internet.
I'm sure my internet history was just Alzheimer's signs. Yeah.
Others began to notice the change in Lori, too. She fought it, but it was time for diagnosis.
When she was diagnosed, she was terrified. I think she didn't really know exactly what to call it, because she didn't want to call it Alzheimer's, because she knew the name and she knew the disease. She cried a lot for about 6 months.
Lori was just 52 years old. Young for Alzheimer's, yes, but not unheard of.
We never exactly knew if she was totally aware that she had the diagnosis, but she would be really terrified. And we recently found, when we were moving out of our house, notes she had written, like, scared of ALZ and stuff. So she was trying to jot down notes and everything, and she was writing me and my sister's names over and over again on pieces of paper. It was painful to discover that.
Try as she may, Alzheimer's is not a forgiving disease. There's no cure, and ultimately, it's fatal. But that's after years of losing your brain function. Memory is the first to go. As her mom's Alzheimer's progressed, young Cassie took over. She was now the caregiver.
She would walk in and she would fall. We have 3 stairs, so I'd have to run and help her there. She would leave the grill on and she'd leave the stove on, which is incredibly dangerous for the house.
She was doing the impossible, balancing school and her mom's deteriorating health. That's when Lori's older sister and Cassie's aunt, Carol, moved in with them to help. But the disease took a turn for the worse.
Living with Lori showed me that there wasn't anything we could do and nothing was slowing it down. And it was so brutal. And we decided it was unsafe for her to live in her house because she no longer recognizes herself in the mirror. It was frightening for her.
While it seems like life has stacked the deck against this family, both Cassie and Carol are quick to point out the many blessings that have come along, like the Aegis Assisted Living Facility in Seattle, where Lori is now living and thriving. She's all smiles as she holds her daughter's hand to answer my questions.
Oh, love to dance.
Love to dance. We put on Beyonce's Single Ladies.
Love it.
The only questions I ask are about her daughter, because the disease has progressed to the point that Lori doesn't know she has Alzheimer's, so there's no point. We just focus on Cassie.
I like how she stands up, and she loves to be a good kid, and you don't have to worry about on any of that.
Both Cassie and Carol owe a lot of Lori's happiness to the adept staff at Aegis Living, who figured out that Lori, being a former Microsoft VP, loved work. So they made her an employee. A game of make-believe, but to Lori, it's very real.
They had a meeting with her. They wrote a contract for her, and every person here is under the premise oh, Lori, our boss. It's probably one of the best gifts that's been given to me throughout this experience.
Not every day is this easy, though. Remember, Cassie is just 18, arguably a time when daughters need their moms the most. In a span of just 2 years from diagnosis to now, Alzheimer's has forced Cassie to talk about Mom in the past tense.
She was my confidant. She was who I'd go to for laughter. I think she was just my best friend. We could talk about anything.
The mom she knew may be gone.
I just miss having conversations with her. Yeah.
but she will cherish this new version of mom she still has. And Aunt Carol, she's mom too. Alzheimer's has a way of expanding the definition of family.
Whoa,
Today
nice.
was a good day for Lori, Cassie, and Carol too. Lori was smiling and running her fingers through her daughter's long hair. And she began to try and braid it, something moms and daughters do all over the world. Except Lori couldn't remember how.
You're just petting it, aren't you?
So Aunt Carol stepped in.
See, they're like 3.
Yes, that's right. So what are you going to do with this?
No matter what you call it, friend,
That's a good
teacher, caregiver, healer of broken hearts,
So I can
that's
start
mom.
right now.
And she comes in all forms.
All right, let's show Cassie her braid.
Oh my gosh, this is gorgeous. Do you want to do my hair for prom?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah? You can do it.
Colleen and Brian, amazing story.
It is. And you know that I'm amazed by that 18-year-old girl who is learning so many lessons from her mom, even though her mom has lost so much of her memory. I mean, that is just truly so beautiful.
And to find a whole new personality in there, and then just to use that. I mean, take what you can salvage and make it wonderful.
It's so true.
Yeah. Seattle's morning news on this Wednesday morning, and KIRO Radio's Josh Kearns joins us. Josh, the Boeing engineers are a little upset that more engineering jobs are leaving town, apparently for Oklahoma City this time, and have asked the legislature to pass a bill which would essentially tie the Boeing subsidies to keeping jobs in town. What chance does that have?
Not a great chance. The state fought so hard, Dave, to win that contract for the 777X by offering up $8.7 billion in tax incentives. But it hasn't stopped SPIA, the machinists as well, from trying very hard to try and hold Boeing's feet to the fire a little bit. What's gone on since that's happened, we've seen about 3,000 jobs moving out of Washington state and another 3,500 or so announced. And what we're talking here about, what Boeing has done, you may recall that in the past we had a number of other besides commercial airlines. We had defense, we had space, we had other support systems, and Boeing has announced that they're consolidating those in other places, including Oklahoma City. Well, word on the street is in the last couple of weeks they've begun serious negotiations with Oklahoma City for $6 million in new incentives. And
Wait, $6 million? That's million with an M?
Yeah, it's chump change.
We gave them billions with a B, didn't we?
Yeah, $8.7 billion. That was just in this round. In 2013, we gave them billions more back in 2003. Boeing's going to take times are tough all over. They're going to take it wherever they can get it. They already have a facility in Oklahoma, and they're looking to expand that. And in exchange, they're offering up about 900 jobs there. And Representative June Robinson, who I talked to, she's sponsoring this measure that essentially ties the incentives to either keeping jobs current or including adding more jobs over the coming years. And she says essentially the company is taking advantage of our largesse.
So what we're seeing is Boeing essentially double dipping, where they're getting their tax incentive in Washington state and then moving jobs from here to another state where they're also getting a tax incentive.
Now, I talked to Boeing. Spokesman wouldn't go on the record with me, but he did send a statement essentially saying that the company has already added about 30,000 employees in Washington since 2003, that they are going to build the 777X here. They're going to add jobs, and they just have to simply consolidate some of these other operations. It's plain business, but they're living up to the letter of the law of the deal that they got when they got the $8.7 billion.
Did Oklahoma City sign some kind of a package deal where on installments where first they get the basketball team, then they get our elephants, and then they get our engineers?
But wait, there's more if you act now. It is funny that it's all happening like that at the same time. It just so happens so Boeing has consolidated defense and support systems in Wichita as well as Oklahoma City. So it's just worked out that way. But you got to wonder what it is that Oklahoma has.
Wichita I'd heard about, but Oklahoma City is a new one on me. Has that been there for a while?
It has been. They several years ago expanded the limited facilities. They had just a couple thousand employees. And since then, they've been growing their presence there.
Does this mean that we are no longer going to design the next innovative jet here? Because it sounds like they've already got their designs, so they don't need these engineers to design new planes.
We are still the hub of Boeing commercial activity. And that will remain the case. And, SPIA still has 20,000 plus members here in the Puget Sound area. What I think it really signals is that there is increasing competition across all fronts. Certainly, we've seen with South Carolina with the 787, them taking more and more work. But I think what it really signals is that the Puget Sound area can pretty much kiss goodbye any work on anything besides commercial airplanes, and that Boeing is going to continue to accelerate that. And the big fear, I talked to Bill Dugovich with SPIA, and he says not only are the engineers worried, but the machinists worried that if you eventually take away all of this intellectual strength here, that you lose the competitive advantage, and ultimately, why would they not then start to move machinist jobs more to South Carolina and potentially elsewhere?
Every other state in the country tied tax incentives to maintaining and actually enhancing jobs. Washington needs to do the same, and we need to do it soon before more aerospace jobs fly away.
I get that. I mean, that is a concern. I think one of the keys, at least from the engineers I talked to having the manufacturing operations and the engineering operations here is from the beginning of a new project, the engineers up in the offices work with the guys down on the shop floor to make sure that the part can be manufactured.
And that is a fear. Nobody knows for sure how many jobs the 777X will create. Will there be a lot of new jobs, or will they simply be transfers from the current program? And again, you look back at Boeing's willingness to go as far down the road as they did with the 87 in South Carolina. Why wouldn't they as they look to a replacement? We know that the next generation plane is going to be a replacement probably for the 757. Who's to say they don't go and start looking to develop it in other places? And then theoretically, we got some room in South Carolina, more land, non-union. Why not build a next generation plane down there?
And yet this bill to link the incentives to job creation doesn't have a prayer.
I would say it would be an extremely tough sell.
KIRO, Josh Kearns. Chris Helbin also follows Boeing. Is Boeing just basically saying, it doesn't matter what incentives you give us, we just think that the salary expenses here are too high compared to these other facilities in the rest of the country?
Yeah, I mean, the labor costs here are much higher than they are in other places. There isn't the threat to strike in a lot of those other places what the unions have here. And again, this is just a business decision to consolidate their engineering. It just makes sense from a business perspective. The fact that what Washington has to understand is this is not Bill Boeing's company anymore, sitting right there on East Marginal Way. Yeah. And this is it's a Chicago-based company that just happens to have its manufacturing hub here, and they're going to do what's best for their business.
So they're not actually using that red barn to make planes anymore?
No, they are not. It's a really good part of the Museum of Flight, but yeah, I mean, it's people have got to get over the nostalgic fact that this is not that old company anymore. They're a bottom line dollars and cents global company that's, is doing what's best for its business.
Seattle's Morning News. Dave Ross with Ursula Royteen, who's in for Colleen this morning. Just over a week ago, an 1,100-square-foot home in Ballard sold for $717,000. That's $652 per square foot. And that pretty much tells the story of the Seattle housing market. Astronomical prices, multiple bids, homes that sell sometimes before they're listed. And part of it is because the economy here is booming and people have cash.
And a lot of them, too, are coming up from California where even as high as home prices have gotten here lately, they still look cheap compared to, say, the Bay Area.
That's Tim Ellis, writer, editor, and founder of Seattle Bubble, a blog that follows the housing market. So the big question is, do you rent or do you buy?
The rule of thumb that I tend to go by is that you shouldn't even really consider buying a home unless you are sure you want to live in a place for, at least I'd say 5 to 7 years.
5 to 7 years. And you should prepare for a lot of additional responsibilities compared to what you face as a renter.
I bought a house in 2011, and there's like a seemingly endless list of various things we want to upgrade or things that need to get replaced. Stuff wears out. And, definitely when you're renting, you don't have to worry about those things directly. But, of course, you're paying for them anyway because they're figured into the rent.
When you own a home, if there's a leak in the roof, that's on you. Broken water heater, I just paid $1,100 to replace mine. But suppose you're paying $2,000 each month in rent. At that point, shouldn't you just bite the bullet and buy a place of your own? Not necessarily, Tim says.
I don't think you can put a fixed dollar amount, like, if you're paying $2,000 a month in rent, you should consider buying a house, because it's likely that if you're paying $2,000 a month in rent, that you're probably living in a neighborhood or in a quality of home that if you were to buy it would cost you, $800,000 here in the Seattle area. And if you look at, what kind of mortgage payment you're likely to have, it's going to be a lot more than $2,000 a month.
So with a market this competitive, should you give up on dreams of owning and just rent instead? Maybe not give up, but perhaps put them on hold.
It's a really frustrating market for buyers. There's very little to choose from, and what little there is to choose from seems like it all has a ton of interest and a lot of competing offers on the table, and prices are just going up really fast. Personally, if I was thinking about buying right now, I would probably end up sitting it out. It feels very similar to me to the way it felt 10 years ago.
It really does. Tim Ellis also says that time is on the renter's side because of all those construction cranes around the city.
I know in Seattle specifically, there's more and more rental units coming online, being finished construction over the next few months and couple of years, that I think the pressure on rents is actually going to be decreasing a little bit.
And if it's any consolation, even well-heeled people like Greg Smith, the CEO of Seattle's Urban Visions, who happens to be a developer, chooses to rent because there are better places to invest your down payment.
If you're looking at it as an investment, I think in today's world, there's a lot of other places to put that down payment to make money, whether that's the stock market or some other income-producing opportunity, an IRA or whatever. That's A. And then B, I just think, we're a society now that's much more mobile.
And as a renter, when that new opportunity comes along, there's no picket fence to tie you down.
It's also a good idea, remember, when you're deciding to whether you rent or whether you buy, do it during rush hour. You should do it during rush hour and day like yesterday when it's thundering and hailing.
Less competition.
Well, not only that, but you get a feel for what commute you're in for the next year.
That is so true.
Next 5 to 7 years that you're going to live in the place. Seattle's Morning News. Dave Ross with Ursula Royteen, who's in for Colleen this morning. The United States has a new nominee to head the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His name is Joseph Dunford, and he represents kind of a change from past Joint Chiefs of Staff. Our military expert from CBS, Major Mike Lyons, is here. He's got some real street cred because of his combat experience, right?
Well, no question. General Dunford has significant experience in the field as an infantry line platoon commander all the way up through commanding troops in Afghanistan. He brings a lot to the table. He brings that kind of emotional intelligence, knowing all the different generations that exist in the military. So he's going to make a decent advisor, I think, to the president, both for this term and then also whoever the next president is.
By all accounts, he's plain-spoken, not afraid to speak his mind. He's a Marine, right?
He's a Marine. He's the second Marine that's been nominated for this position. The first one was General Peter Pace, who only lasted a 2-year term during the Rumsfeld-Bush administration back in 2005. So this is the second chance for the Marine Corps to have this very high senior-ranking officer to be the most senior advisor to the president.
Now, remind us all what the primary responsibility of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is.
Well, the position was created in 1986 in the Goldwater-Nichols Act, and it's designed to be the chief military advisor to the president. It doesn't have necessarily chain of command responsibility, but it's the person responsible for taking all the different inputs from the service chiefs, bringing them and acting as virtually a daily type advisor to the president when it comes to the use of military force. General Dempsey, Martin Dempsey's had the position for the past 4 years. He came from a similar type of background. He was the chief of staff of the Army just for a short period of time, moved up to the position. Same with General Dunford. He's been the commandant of the Marine Corps for just a short period of time before he moves into the same kind of role.
So he decides when it's appropriate to use drone strikes as opposed to actually send soldiers, things like that, or does he help advise as to overall policy, for example, going after ISIS?
He does both. Overall policy is most important for him. He's the person that's responsible for looking over the horizon at the military threats that exist out there to the country, and then advising the president on specific courses of action. And then he turns to those service chiefs who then execute on the president's wishes.
So do you see him taking military in a particular direction?
He's going to have to focus on three major areas while he's chairman. First and foremost is the Middle East and what's happening there, and how we're going to deal with both ISIS and the revolutions that are taking place inside of Syria and Yemen, and trying to contain that situation there. The second one is this pivot to the Pacific as the Navy looks to build up its forces there to watch as the Chinese continue to be very aggressive in some of those shipping lanes. And then the last thing is budgetary concerns that all the service chiefs have right now, going to Congress and trying to get back almost $50 billion a year that's been lost through sequestration since 2012. And if he can do those three things, he'll be a very successful chairman.
We're talking with Major Mike Lyons about the president's nominee to head the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joseph Dunford. In terms of military funding around this area, of course, we're seeing cutbacks. And I can remember in years past warnings about a hollowed-out military, et cetera, et cetera. How do you assess the current state of military funding, Mike?
Well, Dave, it's definitely taken a hit, and in particular the Army, which is going to have to lay off about 80,000 troops over the next 3 to 4 years. And this is this technology advantage that we've gained, let's say, by adding drones and other technology type of equipment. But it does cost soldiers in those positions. And I think we've got to think through whether or not we want to create a military that's going to be more reliant on technology and not reliant on people. There's tremendous pressure, obviously, from the budget side. But General Dunford will focus, I think, first and foremost on military capability, making sure that we always have enough resources on hand to fight the different kinds of wars that are going to present themselves.
Of course, he comes in towards the end of the Obama administration. What kind of job security does a Joint Chiefs chair have? Does he leave when the president changes?
Well, Dave, he'll stay on for two-year terms. So you'll see him at least have a chance to work with the next administration, who will then decide whether or not to offer him another 2-year term. And that's what happened with General Pace. He only had 1 2-year term, and it was considered somewhat of a failure in that regard, in that he didn't get along with the Bush and in Rumsfeld, in particular, Secretary Rumsfeld, when it came to executing some of the military plans in Iraq at the time.
CBS military analyst, Major Mike Lyons. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Dave.
6:52, Seattle's Morning News. In case you missed it, that big accident yesterday near Olive Way on I-5 northbound between the truck and the car and the fire and the smoke, it was caused by the driver of the truck dropping his cell phone, which happens, but it was the next thing he did that caused the problem. He did then bend down and pick it up, and that's all it took to not notice that the traffic was stopped ahead, and kablam, that was it. Fortunately, no serious injuries. It's time for our Sports Insider, Danny ONeil from 710 ESPN Seattle. He's not just a voice and a speaker on your car. He's a head in a box on a major sports television network. He was on ESPN's Outside the Lines yesterday talking about a story that makes every Seahawks fan uncomfortable. Frank Clark, Seahawks draft pick, was kicked off his college team after something happened in an Ohio hotel room. Danny, the way the Seahawks are rationalizing this deal is that it is apparently now unclear what happened in that Ohio hotel room between him and his girlfriend?
No, they've communicated that they have an understanding, Dave, and that's very nice of you to call me a head in a box. I worried that my head was so large it was exceeding the actual size of the TV.
It's so much trouble getting off the pedestal and into the box.
Yeah,
better that than a boxy head.
Yeah, that's true as well. That's true as well. The Seahawks believe they have an understanding of what went on that night, and that's based on talking to the people who investigated it and following its course through the court system. As a prosecutor who was quoted in today's Seattle Times talked about how they drew a conclusion that he was initially charged with domestic violence, eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of disorderly conduct. And to be fair, Frank Clark has always maintained that he never struck her. I think what's unfortunate about this is we're starting to talk about the word of the meaning of struck. And did he hit her with a closed fist? Did he reach out and strike her? Was it it's clear that there was a physical altercation.
But nobody really wants to say what happened. That's what I get from this. Everybody is dancing around what actually happened.
Including the prosecutor in the case.
Correct. And I think that that's exactly right, because to say that and to describe it, I think they fear is minimizing the fact that there was contact between a man and a woman in a domestic situation. The statement from the prosecutor in today's story in the Seattle Times that I took most out of was her talking about her desire to protect the victim, and then also stating that the victim had indicated that she had a role in the escalation of the physical contact.
I see.
And I think that gets to some of the heart of the conclusions the Seahawks drew. But I agree with you, Dave. Nobody's spelling out exactly what happened there. And Frank Clark's expected to talk this week. He's expected to be interviewed. Maybe we'll hear his description, because at this point I feel that you're trying to rationalize something none of us have all the information about.
Danny, one of the big things that was made, at least, or revealed yesterday, was this discrepancy between whether the Seahawks did, in fact, talk to witnesses who were also interviewed by the Seattle Times. And I think some people were taking issue as to whether John Schneider was being forthcoming about how extensive these inquiries were before Frank Clark, was drafted.
I think in a bigger picture, Ursula, what you just said is the big picture questions here are: how does the NFL and NFL teams go about vetting and determining what happened when they consider employing a player like Frank Clark? But you're absolutely right that when John Schneider says we talked to everybody on Friday, and that they spent months looking at this and know more about the situation than they did any other player in the draft, and a news reporter takes days, if not hours, to contact two people who were in the room next door who were not interviewed by the team, that you start to pause and wonder, did the Seahawks find what they wanted to find? The other side of that, and this isn't to advocate or say that this is right, the other side of that is that the Seahawks relied upon the police and the prosecutors, the police who investigated it, the prosecutors who decided to proceed, to talk to and get the information from both the victim and the people that were there that night. And that, I think the bigger question that this raises in my mind is, what is the obligation of NFL teams when they consider employing a player like this? Do they need to go above and beyond what prosecutors and the police do? What is the protocol today for employing someone who faces an accusation that's as ugly as the one Frank Clark did? And I think that those are important questions to ask.
Is there going to be an elevator video come out?
Well, if there is, there's going to be a huge problem, and I don't believe Frank Clark will ever play it down. If there's even another allegation that comes out about an incident in which he had physical contact with a woman, I can't imagine that he will. I guess the one thing in my experience covering the team, and I think it's important to say this, I wouldn't have taken the player given what I know, but I'm also not a talent evaluator that's in charge of making these sort of decisions, and I know that John Schneider and Pete Carroll know more about this player in this situation than I do. The other thing is, I really believe that they did the best investigation they could. I don't think they're being disingenuous. I think that the question of what constitutes a good investigation, especially in light of what we know about domestic violence and about the difficulty in prosecuting those accusations, the NFL and NFL teams need to have a better and more thorough protocol for how they go about vetting that. I think that that's what's very clear to me.
Our sports insider, Danny ONeil. Danny, thank you.
You bet. Talk to you guys soon.